Coming on to the big story last week and into the weekend, the horrific events which took place in Keyham in Plymouth on Thursday have been confirmed as Britain's deadliest mass shooting in over 10 years. The gunman, called Jake Davison, claimed the lives of 5 victims, including his own mother and a 3-year-old girl, before turning the gun on himself.
Yeah, and 2 other victims remain in hospital. Davison has since been linked to a community known as Incels. This is a group of men who identify as involuntary celibates, and they blame women for their failure to find a partner. The group has been connected to a number of violent acts around the world. And you might not have even heard of Incel. So we're joined now by journalist Laura Bates, who infiltrated this community, and also criminologist Professor David Wilson. Good morning to you both. Laura, I do think there were a lot of people who said, what's Incel? Who are these people? What is this organisation? And you were researching a book, firstly, when you came across these people.
Yes, and really the thing that's shocking is that there is able to be this big hate group that is dedicated to extremist hatred of a group, women in this case, that has spilled into offline violence around the world again and again. There have been multiple massacres explicitly in its name, and yet most people have never even heard of it. No. The reason for that is that when these massacres happen, we don't describe them as terrorism, and we don't talk about these individuals as having been radicalised, because the group they're attacking are women. We don't tend to see that as out of the ordinary.
In fact, very quickly...
Why, Laura, do they hate women?
So these are men, particularly incels, who describe themselves as involuntary celibates. In other words, they're men who aren't having sex and would like to be. They've created an entire worldview that sees women as utterly dehumanised sex objects, purely there for their pleasure. And so they blame women for the fact that they're not getting what they see as deserved sex.
Why is that the fault of a woman and not their fault? You know, why can't they look in a mirror at themselves and see the way they physically look, maybe the way mentally they are? Why is it a woman's fault?
Well, exactly. I mean, as if any other extremist ideology, it doesn't make any sense. It is entirely hate-fuelled, but it comes down to the dehumanisation of women. So the idea that they think women are only there to have sex with them and therefore are denying them sex if they don't do it. And I think the answer is violence. How
did you infiltrate this group? Because you say it is all men, so you had to pretend to be a man, I'm assuming. How difficult was it for you to be involved on those forums?
Well, you had to learn the language and the kind of pseudo-scientific backstory that these groups have kind of created to back up their twisted worldview. There are some of these groups where you have to answer a kind of interview questions to get in, to gain access. And there are a lot of things that you need to learn. You know, for example, if you use the word women on these forums, that would be an instant red flag. They don't talk about women. They use the word foid, which is their way of saying female humanoid, which shows you how little they think of women as human beings.
Yeah. But, Professor, Laura is talking there about their innate hatred of women, blaming women in all things. Why then, in Davison's case, does he shoot a child? Does he shoot men as well as women?
Firstly, can I say Laura's work is wonderful, and she really opened up some territory that I think has been important to consider much more seriously than that has been hitherto. You can bizarrely get female incels, they're called femcells, and of course the people who self-identify as incels not only have an extreme misogyny based against their hatred of women, but they also want to attack some men who are seen as being more desirable than they are. They call them chads, in the kind of language that Laura was starting to talk about. So their targets can also be men. I think the key thing that we've got to start working out, and you asked the question, Eamon, that there's a sense of entitlement that they feel. It's not just that they see themselves as poor me because of some kind of genetic determinism. They're too short, they're too tall, they're too overweight, they're not seen as being physically attractive. They don't just think of themselves as poor me's. They see themselves, ironically, as entitled to, in the words of the patron saint of incels, Elliot Rodger, get laid. And the fact that they're not getting laid, they put at the doors of women, and men who are getting laid are also therefore their targets.
And who is Elliot Rodger? Because the Rodger, I'm going to do a Rodger, is mentioned often on these forums.
Yes, Elliot Rodger was a young man who in 2014 in Santa Barbara, California, massacred 6 people and injured another 14, explicitly in an incel massacre. He talked about murdering sluts, he talked about taking revenge on women for the fact that he hadn't had sex, that he was a virgin.
Well, listening to the professor, Laura, you infiltrating their ranks, then they're finding out you are a woman. You are a woman that pretended to be one of them. What sort? I mean, that must invoke fury from them.
Yes, so they've been looking for me since. There are men in these groups now posting pictures of themselves with weapons saying, which one of you is Laura Bates? I'm coming to get you, I'm coming to find you. They've been trying to hack my email account, sending rape and death threats, threatening my family.
Well, I want to hear from both of you now. You first of all, Laura, then the professor. Who are these incels? I mean, we know what they have in common, but who are they? What backgrounds are they from? Who typically would they be?
Typically, I'd say we're talking about educated white men of a range of ages. It's so normal to dismiss these guys and say we're talking about a handful of losers in their mum's basements. That's not the case. It's a big community, significant, numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Let me give you one good example of this. A man who ran an incel website, who wrote an article called How to Psych Yourself Up to Feel Entitled to Rape, in which he wrote, let's be clear, feminism is the problem, rape is the answer. That man was later unmasked as a 37-year-old accountant and congressional candidate in Virginia.
Wow. And was he charged with anything? Was he...
To my knowledge, he's very much still out and kicking. He didn't become a congressional member.
And David, in your opinion, how many incels are there in Britain?
Well, Laura used the figure 100,000. That's probably more akin to what's going on in North America, particularly Canada and the United States. In this country, we're probably looking at tens of thousands. Although the websites and the various platforms that host these kinds of extreme misogyny, there may be many more people using or clicking onto those websites than the core group that will use them regularly. But if we think about 10,000, that would be a good starting point.
And 10,000 what? 10,000 oddballs, 10,000 terrorists? How would you classify them?
I absolutely would classify them as terrorism. I mean, what is terrorism in terms of our legislation? It's the intentional use of violence to intimidate the public. And that's what they want to do. The get out of jail free clause, as it were, in terms of our legislation, is that this is intentional use of violence to intimidate that doesn't have a religious or a race or a political, either far right or far left ideology behind it. But the Devon and Cornwall police's rush to say this wasn't terrorism seems to me to have been very short-sighted indeed, because at the end of the day, Eamon, Ruth, we are dealing with people who, because of their extreme misogyny, are targeting a specific group of people, women. This is an extreme form of hatred against women, and we have to start naming it for what it is. And frankly, it is terrorism.
The Devon and Cornwall police, actually, David, say the decision that this incident was not a terrorist incident was made by the National Counter-Terrorism Network following a referral from Devon and Cornwall police. So they're saying that came from above them. Laura, what about grooming? I mean, are they grooming younger men with this ideology and hatred for women?
Absolutely. These are groups very deliberately wanting to recruit more people to their cause. They're targeting boys as young as 11. They don't go straight in at that stage with incel forums and ideology. They find them on bodybuilding websites. They find them on gaming live streams and gaming strategy chat rooms. And they use things like funny anti-feminist memes, jokes, viral YouTube videos. They use this kind of veil of banter and jokes, but they describe that as, in their own words, adding cherry flavour to children's medicine. And in my work in schools with young people, you do hear an increasing number of young people coming out with some of these complete myths and very misogynistic misconceptions.
You can spot that when
you can see it, yes.
So, David, this is radicalisation then, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And you know, in the United States, or particularly in Canada, the Canadians already recognize this as a form of terrorism. And what we need to do is start having proper discussions with our young people in the way that Laura was explaining in terms of the work that she does in schools. We need to start talking to young men about what it means to be male. We need to start having a proper discussion about masculinity and break this idea that's part of the incel, or those people who self-identify as incels, this link between their belief in their entitlement and therefore their power as they see it over women. That's the discussion that needs to be taking place in every home where there are young men who might be interested in this kind of extreme misogyny.
Laura, what happened in Plymouth shocked and sickened all of us. But for you, had you got an insight into this? Had you a feeling something like this was going to happen, could have happened?
Well, sadly, yes. You know, it isn't the first time. It was only 6 days after a man in Tokyo stabbed 10 people on a train because he saw women looking happy and wanted to kill them. It's not the first time in the UK even that a young man has attempted to murder. Ben Moynihan stabbed 3 different women because he said he hated women and wanted to punish them because he was a virgin. The only reason this is shocking to other people is because we haven't joined those dots, because we haven't described these cases as terrorism. And what I'm seeing now on the incel forums that I had previously been on is men celebrating this act, describing him as a hero, hoping that the victims suffered, and crucially, talking about carrying out more acts, more massacres. And you think, if this had been another form of extremism, if this had been an ISIS massacre, for example, would those websites still be up and easily accessible today?
What about parents? You mentioned there, you know, that they're finding these young boys on gaming sites, and can parents look out for maybe language that they use, their young sons might be using,
telltale
or
signs,
behaviour that they might have?
Yes, they can. So there are lots of bits of language that might be red flags referring to people as normies or as triggered. Normies is the word incels use for people outside their community. Triggered, based, cucked, describing being red-pilled or black-pilled, which are words they use to describe being infiltrated into the ideology. And it's worth saying as well that they see this as a kind of conduit to other forms of extremism. It isn't completely separate from far-right, white nationalist, white supremacist movements. They actually really see it as a slipway. So parents might see a combination of perhaps also racism creeping in as well. The incel community is a very racist community. This is a racist ideology. And of course, white supremacist is a deeply misogynistic ideology.
Yeah. Just finally, Laura, how frightened are you for your own safety?
Well, I think that I'd be more frightened if I was in the US. A member of one of these extremist communities in the US was recently upset with a judge who he claimed was a feminist expletive and turned up at a house described as a delivery driver and opened fire. I think there is danger, and I think that we have to take this seriously. But even saying that, I know there'll be resistance, people saying, oh, stop making a fuss, you're overreacting. Part of the reason for that is because we don't call these attacks terrorism and we don't describe these groups as extremists. And if we did, we'd be able to deal with them more effectively.
Well, Laura Bates, stay safe. Thank you very much indeed for your work. Also disgusting, so shocking. Professor David Wilson, appreciate your take on things. Thank you very much indeed.